Last week on Hofstra's Morning Wake Up Call, we discussed the former LIRR dump site in Brookhaven and the potentially polluted drinking water. In fact, we have seen a disconcerting number of similar stories develop in the past few weeks alone. According to Newsday, Suffolk County Executive Steve Bellone just proposed an almost $30 million fund for, quote, open space and clean water projects, unquote. How do all of these stories come together? There are organizations working to protect Long Island land and drinking water, which in turn helps prevent future dumpings. One such organization is the Long Island Pine Barren Society. Founded in 1977, the Long Island Pine Barren Society is a non-for-profit organization which promotes the protection and informed development of some of Long Island's land. They also work to protect the Long Island drinking water via the Long Island Clean Water Partnership and other initiatives. Earlier this year, for example, members of the Long Island Pine Barren Society helped sue Suffolk County for diverting funds from the county drinking water protection program. Hence the now $30 million proposed fund and other forthcoming steps. So we are joined this morning by Richard Amper, Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barren Society. Richard, we are so excited to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. So before we head into current events, let's start with some background information. What is the Long Island Pine Barren Society, and what does your role as Executive Director entail?
Well, the Pine Barren Society is a not-for-profit environmental education and advocacy group that focuses on water quality and open space preservation. Been around, as you observed, for 37 years. Our function is to educate the public and work with government officials to ensure that the water that 3 million people are depending on for drinking and many of them, if not all of them, for swimming and boating and the fishing and the consumption of food from the surrounding waters, that water is clean. And scientists are now reporting absolutely frightening information about the decline over the past 30 years of water quality to the point where it is a serious concern. Most Long Islanders, according to polls that we have taken, do not know where their water comes from or where it goes when they're done with it. In fact, Long Island is the first federally designated sole source aquifer, meaning that the only place we can get our water from is beneath our feet. And of course, human activity on the surface introduces contaminants to the groundwater and thus affects our drinking water and also our surface waters as those migrate through our aquifer system and end up in our bays and harbors, our rivers, our streams. So we've got a first-rate, probably the greatest environmental challenge ever facing Long Island in terms of reversing the decline in water quality.
Wow. Just for a point of comparison, what do other areas, if not an aquifer, what do they depend on?
For the most part, they depend on surface water systems, New York City being perhaps the famous. Its reservoir system takes water from upstate New York, and it is transmitted by pipes down into the city, and the quality of that reservoir is maintained. I mean, up there you would not, for example, tether 1,000 houseboats on the Croton Reservoir because you would see, oh my goodness, we've got contamination going directly into our water supply. Right. We don't see that on Long Island because our water is all underground, and historically out of sight has been out of mind, and the public really has just not focused on, well, where does that water come from? And by the way, when I wash something down the sink or flush the toilet, where is that water going? And the answer is into groundwater.
All right, so one more just sort of historical view before we head into the current events. So from petitioning to protecting, members of the Long Island Pine Barren Society have had an active part on Long Island since its founding, like you said, about 37 years ago. Can you share some of the Society's major accomplishments regarding land use and water preservation?
Well, yes, thank you. Among them is the 1993 Pine Barrens Protection Act, in which the New York State Legislature actually created New York's third state forest preserve after the Adirondacks and the Catskills. It's a 100,000-acre area in central Suffolk County, which sits atop Long Island's purest water. 50,000 of those acres can never now be developed, and the other 50,000 can only be developed under strict regulation. So that was a major accomplishment. We also worked actively to produce the Suffolk County Drinking Water Protection Program that uses a quarter penny in sales tax to produce money to buy land and take other direct actions to protect water, and has raised more than $1 billion. We supported the open space programs that were successful in Nassau County, and on the 5 East End towns, we're very active in promoting the Community Preservation Fund, which uses a 2% real estate transfer tax to do the same kinds of things to protect the land over our aquifer and those parcels that have a direct impact on coastal waters.
So, regarding the act that you passed in 1993, I want to talk a little bit about Nassau County just for a moment, because this is where we're located here in Hempstead and Center Island. And I have to tell you, I sometimes forget that land is preserved here because there are so many stores, businesses, developments, roadways. There's so much here. And I'm wondering, is it more challenging to preserve the land here in Nassau County, particularly Center Island, because of the proximity to the city? And, you know, does your reach in the Pine Barrens Society extend to Nassau County, or is it primarily concerned with Suffolk County?
No, the answer to your question, and it's a good one, is that the land in Nassau County is also more expensive. There's less of it, and it is, as a result, more valuable. So it is much more challenging to preserve land in Nassau County. The North Shore Land Alliance and organizations like that based in Nassau County are doing a good job, but we work very closely with them because obviously the water is as important to Long Island. We're the Long Island Pine Barren Society, not just the Suffolk County Pine Barren Society. The significant difference, Rebecca, between Nassau and Suffolk County is that most of Nassau County is sewered. That is, wastewater discharged from homes and businesses go into a collective sewer system where the majority of homeowners, for example, in Suffolk County, have their own on-site, on their own property, septic systems or cesspools, and that wastewater is going directly into groundwater. So there is a clear difference in the kinds of things we focus on, but they are no less important one county versus the other.
Wonderful. All right, so let's now turn to the current events. As I mentioned in the introduction, and as Eric and I have been discussing for a while now, Long Islanders have been reading about recent ground and water pollutants, specifically in areas of Suffolk County. In what ways have you and the Pine Barren Society been involved in the conversations, the litigation, etc.?
Well, we've been active. The different organizations play different roles. Civic people tend to deal with land use decision-making at the town or village level. County governments tend to be involved in broader ranges, and state and even the federal government are important because they have economic resources that are helpful to protecting water. In the case of the Pine Barren Society, we're among the few that are willing to litigate. Now, we don't just sue people because we don't like what they're doing. They have to break the law. And frequently there are state laws that particularly require certain actions of government. And when the governments don't take those actions or violate those rules and regulations, we have a rather successful record of litigation and producing a reversal. It's not so much we're not suing for money, we're suing for government services. The first function, the most important function of government is public health and safety, and those are the kinds of things we do. We've also joined with the Nature Conservancy, the Group for the East End, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and some 80 other organizations to create the Long Island Clean Water Partnership. And the focus of that coalition, and it's a broad and very, very influential one, has been to reduce the discharge of the contaminants into water, and to put somebody in government firmly in charge of enforcing it. Those contaminants are principally nitrogen from wastewater, from sewage and discharge from of chemicals, household or otherwise. They come from sewage. They come also from fertilizers. Then our concern is pesticides. They're used by the agriculture industry and by homemakers who are trying to concern themselves about what they call pests. And then finally, we're concerned about toxic chemicals of the sort that you discussed at the beginning of the program, and that is chemicals that were illegally discharged to land with indifference to the water quality below.
So, Rich, as you said, there's a lot. You guys have quite the agenda because there's really so much going on. Talk us through sort of the short-term ways that that you're looking to make waves, and then the long-term plans for the area.
Well, the first and most important challenge for us is to educate the public. While the polling showed that 70% of Long Islanders are getting at least their drinking water from either bottled water or filtered water in their homes, as I said, 60% don't know where their water is coming from or where it's going. And so our biggest challenge is public education. We actually had between 2 and 3% of the people ask in a comprehensive survey in both counties where they thought their water came from, and their answer was from the faucet, stupid. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. It comes from someplace other than that. And so over the course of the next 3 years, we're likely to spend literally millions of dollars in public education so that in turn the public can put pressure on their town, county, state, and federal officials to do the remediation that will reduce this problem.
And Richard, speaking about the people and pressure from them, I know that you're aware of this because I saw you actually quoted in a story on it that I saw on Newsday, where the fund, the $30 million fund for clean water for the county that's been proposed, that will apparently be going before voters in November, but they've already raised some money for it. There was a 0.25% tax increase approved by the voters, and then the money that was supposed to be earmarked for that was apparently borrowed to pay deficits in other programs. Can you tell us a little bit about how going forward we can keep that from happening? If the voters say that they want the money to go towards one thing, how can we make sure that, in this case, clean water, it stays there?
Eric, it's a terrific question. The voters in Suffolk County have put up more money to purchase open space above their drinking water supply than have, get this, 45 of the 50 states in the union. Mm-hmm. And they've done that by going to the polls and voting for a quarter penny sales tax that is to be used exclusively for this purpose. The money was not merely diverted, it was raided, it was bagged because of budget deficits by the county back in 2011. Right. We have brought suit challenging that raid and a subsequent one last year, and have been out collecting signatures to put a referendum on the ballot in November, where the public could go and vote and say, you must give us our money back, and you may never take it again without a mandatory referendum. In other words, this is not money that we're just taxed for. This is money that Long Islanders have voluntarily said we will put up. It's extra money. We're paying 2.5 times the national average in taxes, and yet they said we'll commit a quarter of a penny. It seems like a small amount of money. It's not a very painful kind of tax, but it's produced more than $1 billion. And when the government of Suffolk County broke faith with the public and took it and used it for general fund purposes not intended by the public, we sued, and the solution to the problem appears now to be a settlement which is now in front of the Suffolk County legislature and eventually will go to voters in November, and that says you got to give the $30 million back. Right. You have to stop borrowing against that fund by 2018, and you may never move a penny anywhere because of a change in the county charter, the Constitution of Suffolk County, without the permission at a mandatory referendum in the future. So we think we've got it solved so long as the county legislature and the public supports it. And that's it should be. The public should be calling the shots on this. It's their water.
The public should be calling the shots on most things. Now, one last thing on the financial issues that are going on with the rating of that fund, as you were talking about, is that it appears that what the county's plan is to pay back the money taken from that Clean Water Fund. Again, according to the Newsday article that you were quoted in, the county is now planning on diverting money from the sewer budget back to, is it back to? I mean, is that where the money was taken from? Is there a surplus in the sewers? How are they doing that?
The answer is there is a surplus in the Sewage Tax Stabilization Fund. Some of the money under the Drinking Water Protection Program was to be used to ensure in western Suffolk County, where there is a sewer system, that the taxes in those sewer districts will remain stable. That has generated more money than was needed and contemplated, so we could the county could avoid bonding the additional dollars to pay back the $30 million using that, and it could simply decide that it doesn't want to use money that was dedicated for other purposes in any other way in the future. One of the key questions that you ask at the beginning of the program, essential to your listeners, is it safe to drink the water? And the answer is simply, if you get your water, as most people in Nassau County do, and a majority of the people in Suffolk County do, from a water purveyor, from a water district, that water has been treated and is largely safe to drink in terms of this nitrogen challenge. Down the road, it's going to be more and more difficult to deal with other contaminants, but generally it's safe to drink. We're less sure about volatile organic compounds and pesticides. They're tougher to deal with. But yes, that is true. But for a majority of Suffolk County residents, they're getting their drinking water from a well that's drilled on one portion of the property while they're discharging their sewage on the other side of the property. And that's a very, very open question. Those people should have their wells tested at least annually to be sure that that water is safe. But you ask a real good question at the beginning of the program.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, I certainly hope that we have piqued the interest of our listeners. I think this is something, I know that this is something that directly affects everyone listening. So how can our listeners get involved? How can they contact officials, volunteer? How would you direct them from this point forward?
Well, I would certainly direct them to the website. Tremendously educational, very easy to understand. It's the Long Island Clean Water Partnership.org. They can avoid purchasing and disposing of dangerous chemicals, flushing prescription drugs down the drain, things like that in their homes. But their key role in the years ahead will be to keep their public officials' feet to the fire in terms of the things that we need to do at every level of government. Every time they see a story, every time there is outreach from the partnership to the public, alerting them. You're going to see increasingly in the media reports on the decline of surface waters, beaches closed, shellfish beds closed, as we deal with the harmful algae blooms that come from this contamination. They're going to see more of it, and their reaction to their public officials will be decisive.
Wonderful. I mean, well, that's not wonderful, but it's wonderful that we have
wonderful if democracy works and it solves a big problem like that. I'll give you that.
Yes, and that we have this resource. Once again, that was the Long Island Clean Water Partnership.org. That's right?
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. So that's where we will direct our listeners. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.